Welcome all to another episode of Women Lifting Women. I'm your host, Emma Raz. Thank you for joining me again today, and welcome to Women Lifting Women, a podcast dedicated for female voices in leadership and tech. I'm joined today by the amazing Emily Hanson. Emily, please introduce yourself to our listeners.
Hi everyone, and thanks so much for having me, Emma. It's a pleasure to be invited to be a part of this wonderful series. My name's Emily Hanson, as you said, and I lead EMEA partner marketing for Uber advertising.
That's amazing. And talking about Uber advertising, you've been the marketing lead for some of the most amazing, innovative names in advertising, from finance, Fincast, Uber. How do you think about your leadership style has evolved, and how is the role of, and your perspective as a woman, kind of like shaped it? If you think there is, maybe there isn't.
No, I mean, definitely it has. I think, yes, I have been very fortunate. Well, I've kind of created my own luck, I'd like to think, in that respect, with the companies that I've worked for. And there's definitely been a very deliberate selection process, I would say, in terms of like the potential of the product or the company or the service that it's offering and kind of bringing to the industry. But I guess a really kind of key factor for me in aligning to those businesses is like, one, feeling that I can do a great job of marketing that product or service to the industry, but also very much focused on the people at the company. I think very much drawn to teams, people first, like who are the people that are running it, like do I believe in them, their vision, but also them as leaders? Can I see how we would work together? So there's kind of like lots of factors that have determined kind of like why I've worked for the businesses I've worked for and how I ended up at Uber today as well. But in your question about leadership specifically, I think I'd say my style has become a lot more open. I think it's really key for leaders today, or certainly when I've looked at leaders that I admire and would like to try and like be a bit more like in some respects, it's like the best ones for me are the ones who are approachable, who have that kind of open policy where you have that environment of psychological safety where you can share, you can be honest, you can be yourself, that you can bring ideas, that, you know, there's that free flow of information. Kind of that element of communication, I think, is super important. And I think if your leadership style and you're a bit more detached from that, then you're really kind of not connecting with the teams and therefore not producing maybe the best work that you could be. So with that, you know, I try to lead with empathy. I try to kind of build teams with like diverse skill sets outside of my own, because that they then teach me great things. We kind of like riff off of one another, great creative ideas, and really kind of, I guess, the other aspect, and again something that I've really appreciated in leaders that I've worked for, is them getting out of my way. And I mean that in the nicest respect of just like, you know, trusting, having hired me to do a specific role and, you know, facilitating and allowing it to happen. And I guess that openness and the accessible point is more a kind of, a leader should be there to kind of help unblock or kind of facilitate rather than like getting in the way. So I guess that's kind of how I try to also be for the teams that I show up for and work with.
Oh, that's fantastic. And it's a two-way, I think it's a two-way front. Like, you want to, your leader needs to get out of your way, or wherever is it that can be in the way. Like, you need to facilitate for the person, and the person needs to step into that. Like, so there is kind of like working together to create that space and for that person to kind of fill it. I'm also curious, because you mentioned that you selected the companies based on the people working there. What have been some of your tactics in terms of assessing compatibility?
It's a good question. I think I mean, for me, like in a B2B marketing scenario, so there are some people that are much more kind of like digitally savvy than I am, and in certain aspects, you kind of want to show up in those spaces. So kind of having people that have all of those technical skills sometimes is like an aspect that you'll be looking for, kind of, you know, the kind of hands on the keyboard style. Other times it can be, I mean, it very much depends on like the team that you're trying to build and the priority markets as well. So I kind of will look at it very much in a complementary to the existing teams there. I mean, ultimately in a B2B space, which is where I've sat in my career, there's got to be that close alignment with sales as well. I mean, it's always the love-hate relationship between like marketing and sales teams, but ultimately we are also selling the company and the proposition, and we are enabling them to kind of unlock more budget. So really seeing like marketing and the teams and the skill sets as like selling, as like a growth engine to the business, as being able to kind of like tell those stories across like various different touch points. So yeah, there's kind of a lot of different aspects that we would look at, but definitely always a bit of creativity, even in the more technical roles. I think what I've loved about being in this industry is that yes, we use a lot of tech platforms and everything's very tech enabled, but I love the being with teams that have like creative ideas and trying to bring those to life. Even that, you know, I was at a panel at MadFest earlier this year, and talking about like B2B PR and how B2B sometimes is maybe pigeonholed as being a bit more boring, but I think there's a lot of fun that you can have with it too.
That actually really connects to my next question, right? Like, how do you get cut through? Especially, and how did your maybe unique perspective, you feel like, kind of help get cut through in a space which is very competitive? There is a lot of noise. What do you think?
I mean, yes, at the core, you are looking at, you know, the USPs, like unique selling points of the business, and then you know, talking about outcomes. And there's a lot of things that I could say that's kind of like very by the book and, you know, basically what marketing is. But for using as an example, you know, I look at Uber, and it's, you know, the uniqueness of it, like having the rich first party data. It's something that not necessarily other platforms will have in the same way that Uber does. So how do we look at that? How do we kind of tell that story? The fact that the apps in themselves, Uber and Uber Eats, are, you know, very high attention platforms. Like how do we demonstrate that? How do we kind of like create that narrative that showcases that as an attractive proposition to brands? So in that instance, we kind of partnered with a third party, Lumen, to do kind of an attention study to showcase, you know, the 6.6 times attentive seconds, and you kind of benchmark it against others. And through all of this, it's kind of like there are tactical things, but really the cut through is the so what, right? Yeah. Like, why should people care about those things? You know, is it like there are obviously industry trends and lots of thought leadership out there. And yes, the cut through is the remembering at the end of it that you're talking to people. So making it relatable, making it human. So the messaging has to be authentic. It has to be simple. You know, again, in tech, sometimes we can have a tendency to kind of overcomplicate things where they don't need to be. And I think largely it's about being consistent. You know, much too often we will put out campaigns or messages and they'll sort of be a flash in the pan, and then you're sort of running on to the next thing. So it's about how do you really produce content and messages that kind of keep showing up and resonating and engaging. And to do that, again, I rely on wonderful teams that I have the pleasure of working with, and those skill sets to kind of really make those make them sweat and work hard.
That's a really, really good point of showing up consistently and being able to deliver that level, because you can do amazing things as a one-off, and that's hard but easier. It's to that consistency across board, which has been really challenging. I myself am across both sales and marketing, because like this kind of goes into me. So I do understand, to a degree, the relationship, and the important thing is that, like, in the end of the day, they're both working to the same direction, and that's the goal. That's why we've decided to put them into the same focal point, which have like, how do we sell the company? But it is a very different perspective, and it's quite interesting to see how they interact, and building a team that is able to deliver on that. That's not easy. I've seen my team sometimes push really beyond and doing something amazing, but the next quarter they're so exhausted from the last one. So how do you do this? How do you build up the reliability? How do you make sure you don't burn yourself in the process, and so on? Is it's a challenge I'm sitting with. So advice is welcome.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I guess it's giving people accountability, right? I think having ownership for the things that you do, and I understand what you're saying as well, that can sometimes carry pressure, and you don't want to kind of people to feel overburdened either. But I think that kind of goes back to my earlier point about trying to create environments where you can be honest and share. I think it's important to be able to say, hey, I'm really struggling with this, and then giving people the space to open up more. So, okay, what specifically is it that you're struggling with? And kind of just allowing that to be shared, and then kind of going, okay, well, how can I, or how can we help kind of overcome those things? Or occasionally it might be a prioritization thing. It's like, okay, well, let's just move this away to someone else and you focus on this. And sometimes it's like, actually there are other factors at play, and sometimes I might not be able to fix it directly, but sometimes as a leader it's about suggesting how else it could be done, or bringing other people in who can help. So yeah, I think that being able to create that environment of sharing, because it's great being able to share like the wins, but also the things that are like difficult. Like that's how you do your best work, because not every day is always straightforward and easy and enjoyable.
I agree. And if you can create an environment where people are comfortable enough to know that this will not come back to bite them in the ass, basically they can share, and it will be just that, and that's really okay and normalized. I think that's a wonderful skill as a leader.
Yeah, it's the growth mindset, right? It's the whole, like, we're all learning. Like, no leader, no person who's been in the industry like 30 plus years has everything figured out. Yes, they've seen a lot, they've got great experience, and that should be celebrated and tapped into. I kind of really value that kind of skill set and opinion and breadth of information, but also, like, even the people in the upper echelons don't know everything. And I think we all need to, as I said, take more accountability and share more. And we're seeing a lot more now, I think, authentic leaders who kind of have those forums with their teams where they show up, and they can, where they're imperfect people too, and like we have things that we do better than others, and we have days where we show up better than others, and that's okay. We're all human, and I think sometimes we just need to remember that.
I agree. I mean, actually, so one of the things I'm trying with my team, trying to instill, is I want to create a culture. I want to promote a culture when it's okay, when it's encouraged to fail. And the reason why I wanted to create a fail once. My goal is we get it wrong, and then we don't make the same mistake.
Yeah.
So, and it's also a personal thing. I hate making the same mistake twice. It's a personal like thing that drives me crazy. If I made the same mistake twice, I'm like, how? And I literally had this conversation both with my team and the wider leadership. Is like, I want us to have a culture of people that are happy to fail, because if they're happy to fail, they're happy to try. And if they're so afraid to fail, then they're not going to do things. People that fail are doers, and I want people that do. So I want them to feel comfortable to say that they failed, and we're not going to hunt them or hold them accountable. But I don't want them to feel like we're going to crucify them for a failure. At least not the first one. The third one, like of the same one, like different, fail differently, fail differently, fail differently though. And if you can embrace that mindset, you're just going to fail differently because you've learned something from the first time, and now you're going to try something different. That is the most amazing thing I can recommend to anyone to do. That's
and I think it's a very, I don't know, you're right, like building that culture, and I think it kind of also depends on the region you sit in, right? I mean, we've heard about this a lot, especially, I suppose, like Silicon Valley, West Coast based. Like, it's the failures are like a badge of honor. There's a lot of money that investors funnel into businesses where founders have failed repeatedly, because like ultimately they go, right, well, you've learned those lessons, you've already made those mistakes, so now we can take more of a bet and a punt on the fact that you're really onto something here and you've considered all of these factors. In fact, they are much more conservative. If somebody hasn't failed, it's like, well, you kind of haven't got that full breadth of experience. Whereas I guess like maybe in the UK, the British people are very much more like afraid of failure, and it's like it's really going to count against me if I have to share a moment that I wasn't successful, that people are then going to not trust me, or think that I'm a viable employee person for X and Y. So I think that there's something to be said for that. Of course we're going to make mistakes. It's part of human nature. It's part of how we learn. But your point is valid as well. Like, don't make the same mistakes.
Because that I will go a bit. Like, I will lose. I will be frustrated. Myself. Also with myself, like I never held anyone accountable for anything I would not do, and but that mentality of like, I hate making the same mistake twice, because then it means I haven't learned from it, and I want to make new mistakes every time. And that's kind of my personal goal, and I try to instill that, as I said before. But talking about the whole mentality or ethos, I'm curious about communication, which is a big part also of the culture. I think communication probably has one of the biggest impact on the culture of the company. What part of through Bloom UK, you've been championing women in communication, and what do you think is the initiative and approach that you've seen makes real and lasting difference, maybe, and help women advance into leadership roles? And do you see that being implemented? How do you see it being used?
So there were two reasons that I was very interested in joining Bloom when I found out about it. I was at an industry event, and there was a woman who was up on stage, Katie Jones, who mentioned it and talked about it, and she piqued my interest. So I actually went up and spoke to her about it afterwards, and loved the sound of it so much that I then put in an application to join. It was about 8 years ago now, I think, or something like that. But I guess well, the one thing about it was I'd been working sort of in ad tech specifically for a very long time. And what I loved about Bloom, that it was like really that whole cross section of females in communication. So it meant that, there were lots of women who were part of creative agencies, like people that, those sort of jobs and roles that, like people that I maybe had not necessarily been tapped into. There's like freelancers and people that are kind of like run their own businesses. There's a really like a whole range of women, and so that was really eye-opening to kind of see a much wider cross section of the industry first and foremost. But the main the main reason, other than kind of like the networking with the brilliant women who are part of it, was the mentoring scheme that they have. And I think that that is the initiative that is really moving the needle for women, especially. And I think I was sat in that audience at the event, going, gosh, I wish that this had existed when I was in my 20s, when I had all of these things that I was trying to figure out and all of these roadblocks and or perceived roadblocks. It's probably me just getting in my own way, or things that I just was struggling to navigate. And actually having that female sounding board, like somebody who's like a few years ahead of you in the industry, just saying, hey, like, I'm really struggling with this. It might be, you know, a relationship at work. It might be, I'm not sure that the role that I'm in is kind of suited to my skill set, and I want to kind of transition into a different sort of role somewhere else. Like, what's the best, you know? And it's that kind of sounding board of talking. And sometimes just, I mean, mostly mentoring is kind of about listening, because the mentee, through talking through, is able to kind of figure out their own action plan. Like, ultimately, I think that's the sign of like of being a good mentor to your mentee, is kind of letting them come up with the solutions and feeling empowered to be like, hey, I know what I'm going to do about this now, or I feel a bit more in charge of the outcomes and what I want to take forward. And sometimes it's signposting. Sometimes you go, actually, I can't help you with that, but I do know somebody who can, and you kind of make an introduction or whatever it might be. But it's about kind of creating that safe space and environment for them to kind of really share, you know, what's on their mind, like what's a challenge that they're struggling with and that they haven't necessarily given the time or the space, you know, on the weekend, or like when you're commuting home from work. Like, you're kind of doing lots of different things, but you're kind of on a one-on-one situation, like, actually, this is really bothering me, I want to talk about it. And I think that really helps just kind of break down those perceived barriers of, you know, climbing into like different roles and struggles with teams, or maybe like specific individuals. Like, there's lots of different kind of topics that I've covered in mentoring sessions, and I've also learned a lot. I think like it's never really like a one-way relationship either. Sometimes like the mentees that I've spoken to have, you know, shown up in ways where they've reminded me about things that I actually think are values that are really important to me and that maybe I've neglected, or you know, there's a whole host of things. And I think with Bloom as well, I was fortunate enough, like on the leadership team at the time when they launched the exchange, which was senior male leaders matched with female members of Bloom. So I had a couple of senior male leaders, and that was also another interesting cross section, because I think that sometimes with networks for women, it can often be perceived that you're kind of talking into a bit of an echo chamber. Everybody who's showing up in the room cares about these issues and wants to make a difference, but ultimately, in order to make a real change, you need the whole industry in the room engaged, and that also includes a large number of men who are not in that space. So the whole kind of, you know, driving reason behind creating that was, you know, men kind of willingly coming, but also sharing some of their challenges in the workplace. It was ultimately meant to be that safe space, to have that exchange of them understanding more firsthand maybe things that their female employees or people that worked with them may not share in such like a vulnerable space. Because sometimes you don't want to have these conversations with your managers or people in your team. It's kind of a outside of your organization conversation, I suppose. So yeah, so mentoring, I think, is like a really key driver, and really kind of helping advance people into those kind of roles and spaces, and just kind of help break down that understanding that is, you know, nothing's off limits, and that people are very approachable, and, you know, leaning into kind of others to help.
That's That's, I mean, that I absolutely agree. I mean, I think that as part, like when I did when I mentored someone a bit more last year, one, I found that I learned a lot through the process. Second, that it's a very interesting and powerful thing when to see them kind of come into themselves. And this was just me asking a question here and there, like challenging some of the why do you think you can't do it, like and why do you think that's not possible, and what if you did, and maybe believe in her more than she believed in herself in order to kind of give her that confidence.
Mhm.
So I completely agree with you. And talking, like you mentioned, that you wish that this was something that you had in your 20s. Was there a challenge that you faced as a woman and you felt like like for leader, like trying to grow or build within the industry, and did it teach you something that you still carry with you?
Yeah, I mean, mine has definitely been, which I wouldn't say is necessarily exclusive to women, but I'd say probably relates more to, skews more towards women, is kind of self-silencing, shall we call it, so that I'm in a meeting, everybody else is, far more knowledgeable than me. So I'd maybe kind of like sit there diligently taking notes and kind of absorbing everything, but not necessarily putting up my hand or offering an opinion or attempting to kind of join in the conversation. Very much kind of an observer rather than an active participant. And I guess that younger me would have thought, well, unless I have anything valuable to say, I shouldn't say anything. And there's a happy medium. I don't think you should just say something for the sake of the fact that, you're there. But I think it's about that belief, like claiming your seat. Like, you're in that meeting because you have something to add. You're in that meeting because you have a valuable opinion, and there is something that you can bring to the table. So don't kind of just be passive, like take an active role, whether that be sometimes the confidence in the beginning, or, things that were kind of explained to me at the time. It's like, take a bit of time before the meeting and, kind of have like maybe a couple of bullet points of things that you want to land because you've done the prep in advance, or whatever it is, to kind of help give you those like incremental bits of confidence, until then it just becomes a bit more second nature. But kind of, yeah, I think self-silencing for me, or feeling feeling inferior, I suppose, in those kind of environments. And I also now, I think, because I used to be that person, sometimes if I'm in meeting rooms or I notice that people maybe haven't said something or are being a bit quiet, not that I like to pick on anyone or make them feel uncomfortable, but sometimes it's maybe a case of, well, what do you think about this? And actually that kind of shifts the focus, and people go, oh, well, you care about what I have to add to this, and people relax into it. And actually, I think sometimes that's what's required to just help bring people a bit more into the conversation, and just inviting more opinions. So yeah, that's definitely something that I now try to carry into like my roles and the rooms that I'm in. It's about what can I add, but then also looking around and saying, is there anybody that potentially does have something else to say on this that maybe isn't offering that opinion, and just kind of helping them. So yeah, I try to model that.
That's fantastic. I had to learn almost like, so I started my career in an environment where you had to fight to speak. So it kind of teaches you, because different cultures have different speaking styles, and some of them is on top of each other. And this is the normal communication mechanism. I had to unlearn it to some degree, which is very interesting. It's a process, because when you work in different work internationally, work in different cultures, when you grow up or you grow in the industry and you have to, like, the only way to speak is if you like force it. When you develop very interesting speaking style. I'll say that. And also you develop very thick, you kind of like either survive it or not. I don't think we should recommend that, but it was definitely something I've noticed, especially since I changed the work environment in different countries, and they're like, oh, this is different. And I had a journey of adjusting to that, to being really used to um the good thing is he taught me to be confident even if I have no confidence. Like you pretend confidence. But that was my first job, and I would go to the bathroom like I think about twice a day and tell myself in the mirror like sink or swim, sink or swim. Just pretend that you feel like you know what you're doing and it will be all right. And I convinced myself at that point that this is the case, and that will take it.
Yeah, it's like that internal pep talk. And again, like, you know, it's I think sometimes like having mentoring or a space or somebody else like kind of championing you, saying you got this, like, you know, look at your career, look at your experience, look at the things that you've done. Like, why would you doubt yourself or think that what you have to add doesn't matter as much as the person sitting next to you? And, you know, they talk about those exercises, right? If you want to go up on stage and things where you kind of stretch out in the mirror and like, you know, kind of actively like and shout and kind of, you know, give yourself that internal pep talk, that energy almost to carry. And just I think largely it's a confidence thing. Like, we're afraid of saying the wrong thing or people thinking less of us because of who we are and what we say, and you know, it's everybody's human and everybody has something to add. So I think it's about there is a bit of fake it till you make it, I suppose, element to it. And I can definitely think of rooms that I've entered into and done that. But, you know, ultimately, like, look at why is it important to you? Like, what is your passion? I think if you can tap into like into something else, and that will kind of help build that confidence and help build that that voice.
Yeah, I agree. And reminding yourself that probably other people also feel the same way. And nobody knows everything, and it's okay to fail once. So
Just one time.
Just one time. Twice if I'm generous. With the same thing, with the same. If it's the same, if it's different, that's all right. You can do like 100 different ones. And we do have another guest joining, my husky Aurora, which I think everyone have met at some point or another, decided to go right next to me. So if I look by chance like I'm going down, it's because I have a request and demand to be to pet. But
I have met Aurora. I have had the privilege.
Oh, she is going through her shedding season, so we are heavily under floofed. But hopefully that will end and I will defloof soon. For our final question, my favorite question, the superpower question, because I want to know about what you think is your superpower and how it helped you through your career.
Yeah, that is a really good question. I thought about this one quite a lot. But I think my superpower, I would say, is I'm very trusting. So, and by that I mean I always believe the best in people. And, you know, I think that's enabled me to build really strong relationships and be a really kind of natural collaborator with people. Obviously, you know, people say that to me, that occasionally, of course, that backfires. Like, not everybody can necessarily be trustworthy, and, you know, you kind of like learn along the way. But ultimately, kind of when I enter into a room or a conversation with anyone, I always believe the best in people. And I think that has really helped in my career in marketing and communications. Definitely has applied, and working with really senior people, very junior people, just that trust and openness. So yeah.
I think that's wonderful. And I think that if you come in trusting people, people will often choose to respond to your trust because they feel that you trust them. So they would choose to meet it and to respect to it and respond to it. Yeah, you're right, not everyone is trustworthy, but I mean, it is good that you can come in with that really positive energy.
Yeah. And as you say, like, you know, if they prove to me that they can't be trustworthy, then I've learned that lesson, right? I'm not going to make that mistake again.
For people, I try to, like, if it's a person altogether, I'd give them a grace of, like, you can fail me, like there is a 3-strike rule. You fail me 3 times and then that's it. You're out.
Yeah.
If it's like a mistake, that I am a bit more strict about. But I mean, I like that we're in agreement regarding, like, well, you know, mistake, like, what, first strike.
But we're all growing and learning all the time.
Absolutely.
Growth.
Absolutely. And I think that's a positive, really wonderful note to end on. So thank you so much, Emily, for joining me today. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you for having me, Emma. And yeah, talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for everyone listening in. For this and many more episodes, please go to www.womenliftingwomen.io, and I will see you all next time.